Blackwells Spirit. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire had spent years at court avoiding Sir Nicholas Warwick, the king's most dangerous knight. But when he stepped in front of her path one evening, his voice was dangerously soft. "You have secrets, Cecily," he murmured. "The only question is, will you give them to me willingly?" Chapter 1. The Whispers of Ravensshire. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls of Ravenshire's ancient hall, illuminating the tapestries that depicted scenes of long-dead ancestors and battles won with blood and steel. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire sat beside the hearth, the warmth a meager comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It wasn't the chill of the approaching winter, but a colder, more persistent dread that had taken root in her heart years ago, a dread that whispered of secrets and betrayals. She traced the worn, familiar lines of a silver locket that hung hidden beneath her gown, a tangible link to a past she dared not speak of, a past that held both the sweetest joy and the bitterest sorrow of her life. The locket, shaped like a raven in flight, was a gift from her brother, Thomas, before he rode off to war, a war from which he never returned. Or so everyone believed. Cecily's fingers tightened around the locket. The official report spoke of a valiant death, a hero's fall in service to the king. But the whispers, the ones that haunted her dreams and stole her peace, spoke of something far more sinister. Treason, a hidden alliance, a betrayal that cost not only Thomas's life, but stained the very name of Ravensshire. She glanced up as a serving maid, Alara, a young woman with eyes that held a quiet wisdom beyond her years, entered the hall, carrying a tray laden with a simple supper of roasted pheasant and spiced wine. Alara placed the tray on a low table beside Cecily, her movements careful and silent, a testament to years of service in a household where discretion was as vital as loyalty. "My lady," Alara murmured, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Lord Elmsworth has sent word. He expects your presence at court within the fortnight." Cecily closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the summons pressing down on her. Court. The very word sent a shiver of apprehension through her. Court was a viper's nest of ambition, intrigue, and carefully veiled threats. It was a place where smiles hid daggers and compliments were laced with poison. And it was the last place she wanted to be. Lord Elmsworth, her uncle and the current head of the Ravensshire family, had been relentless in his efforts to secure her a suitable marriage, a marriage that would elevate their family's standing and solidify their alliance with the king. Cecily, however, had resisted every suitor, every carefully orchestrated encounter, clinging to the freedom, however fragile, that her widowhood afforded her. Her brief, ill-fated marriage to Lord Ashton, a man old enough to be her grandfather, had ended abruptly with his death, leaving her with little more than a title and a profound distrust of the gilded cage of noble matrimony. "Did he mention any specific reason for the summons?" Cecily asked, her voice betraying the tremor of unease she felt. Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "He spoke of consolidating alliances, my lady. There are rumors of unrest in the northern territories. The king seeks to strengthen his hold on the realm." Cecily knew what that meant. Marriage. A strategic union to bind a powerful lord to the king's cause. And she, with her Ravensshire blood and her widow's wealth, was a valuable pawn in that game. She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks that surrounded the castle, their rustling a mournful lament. The first snowflakes of winter were beginning to fall, swirling like lost souls in the fading light. She had managed to evade court and the relentless matchmaking for years, finding refuge in the solitude of Ravensshire. But her sanctuary was crumbling. The whispers of her brother's alleged betrayal had grown louder, reaching even the king's ears. Elmsworth, ever the pragmatist, saw her presence at court as a way to dispel the rumors, to prove their loyalty through a carefully chosen alliance. But Cecily knew that court was a dangerous place for someone with secrets. And she had more secrets than most. Secrets that, if revealed, could shatter not only her own life, but bring ruin upon her entire family. She turned back to Alara, her face set with a newfound resolve. "Prepare my things, Alara. We leave for court at dawn." Alara nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. She knew, as Cecily did, that this journey was not merely a social call. It was a descent into a world of shadows and lies, a world where survival depended on wit, courage, and the ability to keep one's secrets buried deep. As Cecily stood there, the wind howling outside, a single name echoed in her mind, a name that sent a shiver of both fear and a strange, unsettling fascination through her: Sir Nicholas Warwick, the King's silent blade. The man they said never smiled, never spoke unless necessary, and whose loyalty to the king was as unyielding as the steel of a sword. The man who, she knew, watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She felt a sudden, almost overwhelming urge to flee, to disappear into the gathering storm and leave the intrigues of court far behind. But she knew she couldn't. She had a duty to her family, to her brother's memory, and to the truth, however dangerous it might be. She would face the court, face the whispers, and face Sir Nicholas Warwick. She would play the game, wear the mask, and pray that she could survive the deadly dance that awaited her. The fire had died, and the shadow in the hall seemed to whisper the dangerous knight's name. Chapter 2. A Knight's Shadow. The journey to the king's court was arduous, the winter roads treacherous with ice and snow. Cecily, wrapped in furs and huddled in the confines of the carriage, found little comfort in the rhythmic sway of the horses. Her mind was a tempest of anxieties, each mile bringing her closer to the gilded cage she so dreaded. She thought of Sir Nicholas Warwick. She had seen him only a handful of times during her brief, previous visits to court, but his image was seared into her memory. Tall and imposing, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face that seemed carved from granite, he exuded an aura of danger and unwavering authority. He was the king's most trusted knight, his silent blade, a man rumored to be as ruthless as he was loyal. Cecily had always felt his gaze upon her, a silent scrutiny that made her acutely aware of her own vulnerability. He had never spoken to her directly, but she had heard the whispers, the hushed tones that spoke of his unwavering dedication to the king and his uncanny ability to uncover secrets and expose treachery. The thought of facing him, of having her secrets laid bare under his penetrating gaze, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She knew that her carefully constructed facade of a grieving widow, a woman content with her solitude, would be no match for his scrutiny. She glanced at Alara, who sat opposite her, her face etched with concern. Alara had been more than a servant, she was a confidant, a friend, the one person Cecily trusted implicitly. "Do you think he knows?" Cecily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alara met her gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Knows what, my lady?" she asked softly, though she knew precisely what Cecily meant. "About Thomas. About the whispers." Alara hesitated. "It is his duty to know everything that goes on at court, my lady. And whispers they travel on the wind." Cecily sighed, her breath misting in the cold air. "I fear he suspects something. I have seen the way he looks at me, as if he can see through me to the very secrets I hold." "He is a dangerous man, my lady," Alara agreed. "But you are strong. You have survived much. You will survive this." Cecily drew strength from Alara's words, but the knot of apprehension in her stomach remained. She knew that surviving court would require more than strength. It would require cunning, deception, and a willingness to play the game, a game she had always despised. As the carriage finally approached the towering walls of the king's castle, Cecily felt a sense of impending doom. The castle, a sprawling fortress of stone and steel, seemed to loom over her, a symbol of the power and authority she was about to enter. The courtyard was a hive of activity, with knights in shining armor, richly dressed nobles, and bustling servants all vying for space. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the ever-present undercurrent of ambition and intrigue. As Cecily stepped down from the carriage, she felt 100 eyes upon her, assessing, judging, speculating. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and forced a smile onto her face. She would not show fear. She would not betray her vulnerability. She was led through a maze of corridors, each more opulent than the last, the walls adorned with tapestries, portraits, and the gleaming weapons of war. The sheer scale of the castle, the sheer display of wealth and power, was overwhelming. Finally, she was ushered into a lavishly appointed chamber, her temporary residence during her stay at court. The room was spacious and richly furnished, with a large four-poster bed, a roaring fireplace, and windows that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding countryside. But Cecily barely noticed the splendor. Her mind was focused on what awaited her, on the inevitable encounters with the king, with Lord Elmsworth, and with Sir Nicholas Warwick. She was unpacking her belongings, with Alara's help, when a knock on the door startled her. A young page, dressed in the king's livery, stood in the doorway. "Lady Cecily of Ravensshire," he announced formally, "the king requests your presence in the great hall." Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. The summons had come sooner than she expected. She exchanged a nervous glance with Alara, who offered a reassuring nod. "Tell the king I shall attend him shortly," Cecily replied, her voice surprisingly steady. The page bowed and departed, leaving Cecily to face the daunting task of preparing herself for her audience with the king. She chose a gown of deep blue velvet, its simplicity a deliberate contrast to the extravagant attire she knew would be on display in the great hall. She wore her hair loose, cascading down her back, a subtle act of defiance against the elaborate hairstyles favored by the court ladies. As she walked towards the great hall, she felt a presence behind her, a silent shadow that followed her every step. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Sir Nicholas Warwick. He walked a few paces behind her, his footsteps silent on the stone floor, his presence a palpable weight on her senses. She could feel his gaze on her back, intense and unwavering. She reached the entrance to the great hall, the sound of music and laughter spilling out into the corridor. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what awaited her. As she stepped through the doorway, she saw him, standing near the king, his eyes already fixed on her, and the subtle tilt of his head felt not like a greeting but like a challenge. The game, it seemed, had already begun. Chapter 3. The King's Decree. The great hall was a spectacle of medieval grandeur. Torches blazed in wall sconces, casting a warm, flickering light on the assembled nobility. The air hummed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of goblets. Long tables, laden with food and drink, stretched the length of the hall, and at the far end, on a raised dais, sat King Edmund, a man whose presence commanded both respect and fear. Cecily approached the dais, her steps measured and deliberate, her gaze fixed on the king. She curtsied deeply, her head bowed in deference. "Lady Cecily," the king said, his voice booming across the hall, "welcome to court. We trust your journey was uneventful." "Thank you, your majesty," Cecily replied, her voice clear and steady. "The journey was as pleasant as winter allows." The king studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp and assessing. He was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with the burdens of rule, but his gaze still held the fire of a warrior. "We are pleased you have heeded our summons," he continued. "These are troubled times, Lady Cecily. Unrest stirs in the north, and loyalty is a virtue we value above all else." Cecily knew this was not merely a polite greeting, it was a veiled warning. The whispers about her brother had reached the king's ears, and he was reminding her of the importance of unwavering allegiance. "My family has always been loyal to the crown, your majesty," Cecily replied, her voice unwavering. "The actions of one misguided individual do not reflect the loyalty of the entire Ravensshire lineage." She saw a flicker of something approval, perhaps in the king's eyes. But before he could respond, Lord Elmsworth stepped forward, his face beaming with a forced joviality. "Your Majesty," Elmsworth said, bowing deeply, "may I present my niece, Lady Cecily, a woman of exceptional beauty and grace, a true jewel of Ravensshire." Cecily forced a smile, enduring her uncle's effusive praise. She knew his motives were far from altruistic. He was showcasing her, presenting her as a prize to be won, a pawn in his political machinations. The king nodded, acknowledging Elmsworth's introduction. Indeed, Lord Elmsworth. Lady Cecily is a welcome addition to our court. He then turned his gaze back to Cecily, his expression softening slightly. We understand you have been in mourning, Lady Cecily. We offer our condolences for your loss. Thank you, Your Majesty, Cecily replied, bowing her head. I find solace in the service of my family and the hope for brighter days. The king's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. Then he gestured to a figure standing silently beside him. Sir Nicholas Warwick. Lady Cecily, the king said, you know Sir Nicholas, our most trusted knight. Cecily met Warwick's gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to bore into her, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of deception. I have had the honor of seeing Sir Nicholas at court before, Your Majesty, Cecily replied, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Warwick inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was barely a nod. He didn't speak, his silence adding to the weight of his presence. Sir Nicholas will be overseeing your security during your stay at court, the king continued. Given the delicate situation in the north, we must ensure the safety of all our loyal subjects. Cecily felt a chill run down her spine. This was not merely a courtesy, it was a thinly veiled threat. Warwick was to be her shadow, her jailer, the ever-present reminder of the king's scrutiny. I am grateful for Your Majesty's concern, Cecily replied, forcing a smile. I am sure Sir Nicholas's presence will be most reassuring. The king smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. We are confident it will be, Lady Cecily. We are confident it will be. The audience concluded, and Cecily was left to navigate the treacherous currents of courtly life, with Warwick's shadow looming over her every move. She mingled with the other nobles, exchanging polite conversation, all the while aware of Warwick's presence, a silent observer in the background. She found herself drawn into conversations about the unrest in the north, the rumors of rebellion, and the king's efforts to quell the dissent. She listened carefully, gleaning information, trying to discern the truth from the web of rumors and half-truths. She noticed that many of the nobles were eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and speculation. She was, after all, a wealthy widow, a potential prize in the marriage game. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure to choose a suitor, to solidify an alliance. But her mind was not on marriage. It was on survival. It was on uncovering the truth about her brother's fate and on protecting herself from the ever-present threat of Sir Nicholas Warwick. As the evening wore on, Cecily found herself increasingly isolated, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. She excused herself from the festivities, claiming a headache, and sought refuge in her chamber. She found Alara waiting for her, a warm fire burning in the hearth. Alara helped her undress, her touch gentle and reassuring. He watches you, my lady, Alara said softly, as she brushed Cecily's hair. Like a hawk watches its prey. Cecily sighed. I know. He suspects something. I can feel it. You must be careful, my lady, Alara warned. He is not a man to be trifled with. Cecily nodded, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. She knew that the game had begun, and that she was playing for her life. She had to be smarter, more cunning, than she had ever been before. She had to outwit the king's silent blade, or risk losing everything. As she drifted towards a restless slumber, a final, chilling thought remained. She hadn't only to outwit him, but to also avoid the unnerving pull she felt whenever he was near. A pull she couldn't and wouldn't understand. Chapter 4. Masks of the Court. The days that followed were a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Cecily immersed herself in the rituals of court life, attending banquets, participating in hunts, and engaging in polite conversation with the endless stream of nobles who sought her favor. She smiled, she flattered, she played the role of the grieving widow, the loyal subject, the desirable bride. But beneath the surface, she was constantly on guard, her senses alert to any hint of danger, any sign of suspicion. Sir Nicholas Warwick was her constant shadow. He was always there in the background, his presence a silent, unwavering reminder of the king's scrutiny. He rarely spoke, but his eyes followed her every move, dissecting her words, her gestures, her interactions with others. Cecily found his presence both terrifying and strangely intriguing. There was a mystery about him, a hidden depth that she couldn't quite decipher. He was a man of few words, but his silence seemed to speak volumes. She wondered about his past, about the experiences that had shaped him into the stoic, unyielding knight he was. She wondered if there was any warmth, any vulnerability beneath the cold exterior. She tried to avoid him, to keep her distance, but it was impossible. He was assigned to her protection, and he took his duty seriously. He was always within earshot, always watching, always there. One afternoon, Cecily found herself in the castle gardens, seeking a moment of respite from the stifling atmosphere of the court. The gardens were a haven of peace, with snow-covered paths, frozen fountains, and the bare branches of trees reaching towards the pale winter sky. She was admiring a statue of a falcon, its wings outstretched in flight, when she heard the crunch of footsteps on the snow behind her. She turned to see Warwick approaching, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the king has requested an update on your well-being." Cecily met his gaze, her heart pounding. "My well-being?" she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I am well, Sir Nicholas. As well as can be expected, given the circumstances." "The circumstances?" he repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The unrest in the north," Cecily said, choosing her words carefully. "It is unsettling." He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "You seem preoccupied, Lady Cecily. Is there something troubling you?" Cecily forced a smile. "Only the concerns that any loyal subject would have in these uncertain times, Sir Nicholas." He didn't reply, but his silence was more unsettling than any words could have been. He seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade, to the anxieties and secrets she was trying so desperately to conceal. "The king values loyalty, Lady Cecily," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "Above all else." "I am aware of that, Sir Nicholas," Cecily replied, her voice unwavering. "And my loyalty to the king is beyond question." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that could have been either agreement or skepticism. "We shall see, Lady Cecily," he said softly. "We shall see." He turned and walked away, leaving Cecily standing there, her heart racing, her mind reeling. His words were a veiled threat, a reminder that he was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake, to reveal her true self. She knew she was playing a dangerous game. She was walking a tightrope, with the abyss of exposure and ruin on either side. She had to be more careful, more cunning, than ever before. As the days turned into weeks, Cecily found herself drawn into a web of courtly intrigue. She learned of rivalries between noble houses, of secret alliances, of whispered plots and conspiracies. She realized that the unrest in the north was not merely a rebellion, it was a symptom of a deeper malaise, a power struggle that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. She also learned more about Sir Nicholas Warwick. She heard stories of his bravery in battle, his unwavering loyalty to the king, his ruthless efficiency in rooting out treachery. She heard whispers of a lost love, a woman he had been betrothed to who had died tragically, leaving him a broken man. She found herself increasingly fascinated by him, drawn to the mystery that surrounded him. She saw glimpses of vulnerability beneath his stoic exterior, hints of a pain that he kept carefully hidden. She began to wonder if he was more than just the king's silent blade, if there was a heart beating beneath the armor. And, against her better judgment, she found herself starting to care. This realization, fragile and terrifying, bloomed in the quiet moments when she wasn't pretending, wasn't playing a role. It was a dangerous, foolish feeling, one she knew she had to suppress. But it lingered, a whisper in the silent chambers of her heart, growing stronger with each passing day and with each stolen, intense glance from the knight who held her fate in his hands. Chapter 5. The Falcon's Flight. The king announced a grand tournament, a display of knightly prowess, and a celebration of the realm's strength. The event was intended to boost morale and demonstrate the king's power in the face of the growing unrest in the north. For Cecily, it was another layer of the elaborate performance she was forced to maintain, another opportunity for scrutiny and veiled threats. The tournament grounds were a riot of color and sound. Banners bearing the crests of noble houses fluttered in the wind, and the air was filled with the clang of steel, the thunder of hooves, and the cheers of the crowd. Knights, clad in shining armor, paraded before the assembled nobility, their lances held high, their faces hidden behind visors. Cecily sat in the royal box, beside Lord Elmsworth and other high-ranking nobles. She forced a smile, applauding politely as each knight presented himself. But her mind was elsewhere. She was watching Sir Nicholas Warwick, who was overseeing the tournament, his presence a constant reminder of the king's watchful eye. Warwick was not participating in the tournament himself, but he moved among the knights with an air of authority, his gaze sharp and discerning. He seemed to be everywhere at once, ensuring the smooth running of the event, his presence a calming influence on the potentially volatile gathering. Cecily found herself strangely drawn to him, her gaze lingering on his tall, imposing figure. She admired his strength, his discipline, his unwavering dedication to duty. She also saw a loneliness in him, a sadness that mirrored her own. During a lull in the events, Cecily excused herself from the royal box, seeking a moment of solitude. She wandered through the bustling crowds, her senses overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle. She found herself drawn to the falconry tent, where the king's hunting birds were kept. She had always been fascinated by falcons, their fierce independence, their ability to soar above the world, unbound by earthly constraints. She approached one of the falconers, a grizzled old man with a weathered face and knowing eyes. "They are magnificent creatures, are they not?" Cecily said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. The falconer nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Aye, my lady. They are the spirit of freedom, embodied in feather and claw." He held out a gloved hand, and a beautiful peregrine falcon, its feathers a mix of gray and white, perched gracefully on his wrist. The falcon's eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to pierce Cecily's soul. "This one," the falconer said, stroking the bird's feathers. "She is called Shadow. She is the king's favorite." Cecily reached out a tentative finger and gently touched the falcon's breast. The bird remained still, its gaze unwavering. "She is beautiful," Cecily whispered. Suddenly, a voice behind her made her jump. "Indeed she is." Cecily turned to see Sir Nicholas Warwick standing there, his expression unreadable. He had approached silently, as always, his presence both startling and strangely comforting. "Sir Nicholas," Cecily said, her heart beating faster. I did not hear you approach." He inclined his head slightly. "I have a habit of moving quietly, Lady Cecily. It is useful in my profession." He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the falcon. "Shadow is a remarkable bird. Loyal, fearless, and swift. She always returns to her master." Cecily met his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. His words seemed to carry a double meaning, a subtle reference to her own situation, to her duty to the king. "Like all loyal subjects should," Cecily replied, her voice carefully neutral. He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching. "Loyalty is a complex virtue, Lady Cecily," he said softly. "It can be tested, strained, even broken. But true loyalty," Cecily said, her voice gaining strength, "endures. It cannot be swayed by fear or doubt." He held her gaze for a long moment, then a flicker of something admiration, perhaps, crossed his face. He reached out and gently stroked the falcon's feathers, his hand brushing against Cecily's. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. "You have a fondness for falcons, Lady Cecily?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I admire their freedom," Cecily replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Their ability to soar above the world, to escape the confines of earthly concerns. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. Freedom is a precious thing, Lady Cecily, and often it comes at a price. He looked at her, a long look, not of suspicion this time, but of something else, something deeper. Something she saw reflected back in her own soul. He turned, breaking eye contact, and without another word, the king's silent knight walked away. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Tapestry. The tournament concluded with a grand feast in the great hall. Cecily, seated at the high table, found herself the object of much attention. Suitors, eager to win her favor, vied for her attention, showering her with compliments and veiled promises. She navigated the social minefield with practiced grace, deflecting their advances with polite smiles and carefully chosen words. But her mind was not on the festivities. She was thinking about her encounter with Sir Nicholas Warwick in the falconry tent. His words, his touch, the unexpected glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes, had stirred something within her, a feeling she had long suppressed. She found herself increasingly drawn to him, despite the danger he represented, despite the impossibility of their situation. As the evening wore on, Cecily felt a growing sense of unease. The whispers about her brother had resurfaced, fueled by the presence of Lord Barristan, a powerful nobleman from the north who had been a close ally of Thomas. Barristan had always been suspicious of the official account of Thomas's death, and his presence at court was a constant reminder of the unresolved questions that haunted Cecily. She noticed Barristan watching her, his gaze filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She knew she had to be careful. Any misstep, any hint of doubt, could expose her to danger. She excused herself from the feast, claiming fatigue, and sought refuge in her chamber. She found Alara waiting for her, a worried expression on her face. "My lady," Alara said softly, "Lord Barristan seeks an audience with you." Cecily's heart sank. She had hoped to avoid Barristan, but it seemed inevitable. "Send him in," she said, resignation in her voice. Barristan entered the chamber, his demeanor formal and guarded. He was a tall, imposing man, with a stern face and piercing eyes. He had been a close friend of Thomas, and Cecily knew he harbored doubts about the circumstances of her brother's death. "Lady Cecily," Barristan said, bowing slightly, "I apologize for intruding, but I must speak with you." "Of course, Lord Barristan," Cecily replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What is troubling you?" He hesitated, his gaze searching. "It concerns your brother, Thomas," he said finally. "I have never believed the official account of his death." Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. She had to tread carefully. "Lord Barristan," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "my brother died a hero's death, serving the king." Barristan shook his head. "There are inconsistencies, Lady Cecily. Whispers of a betrayal, a hidden alliance. I believe Thomas was murdered, and the truth has been concealed." Cecily felt a chill run down her spine. Barristan's suspicions mirrored her own, but she couldn't afford to reveal her doubts. "Lord Barristan," she said, her voice firm, "I understand your grief, but I cannot entertain such accusations. My brother was loyal to the king, and I will not allow his memory to be tarnished by baseless rumors." Barristan studied her for a moment, his eyes filled with doubt. "I hope, for your sake, Lady Cecily, that you are right," he said softly. "But I fear the truth is far more complex and far more dangerous." He bowed and departed, leaving Cecily shaken and filled with a renewed sense of urgency. She knew she had to find the truth about Thomas's death, not only to clear his name but to protect herself from the growing threat that surrounded her. Later that night, unable to sleep, Cecily found herself wandering the castle corridors. The castle was silent, the only sounds the crackling of torches and the occasional creak of old wood. She felt a strange sense of freedom in the darkness, a respite from the constant scrutiny of the court. She found herself drawn to the castle library, a vast chamber filled with ancient books and manuscripts. She had always loved books, finding solace in their pages, escaping into worlds far removed from her own. She lit a candle and began to browse the shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of the worn volumes. She discovered a hidden alcove, concealed behind a large tapestry depicting a scene of a knight slaying a dragon. The tapestry seemed oddly out of place, its colors brighter, its style more recent than the others in the library. Curiosity piqued, Cecily examined the tapestry more closely. She noticed a small, almost imperceptible tear in the fabric, near the bottom corner. She gently pulled at the tear, and to her surprise, the tapestry swung open, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear, Cecily stepped through the opening, the tapestry closing silently behind her. The passage was dark and narrow, the air thick with the scent of dust and old parchment. She followed the passage, her candle casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The passage led to a small, hidden chamber, lit by a single oil lamp. The chamber was filled with books and scrolls, but unlike the library, these were not ancient texts. They were more recent, and their contents seemed secretive. Cecily began to examine the documents, her heart racing as she realized what she had found. The chamber was a repository of secrets, a place where hidden truths were recorded and concealed. She found letters, reports, and coded messages, all detailing the intrigues and conspiracies that swirled beneath the surface of the court. And then she found it, a letter, bearing the seal of her brother, Thomas. The letter was dated just days before his death, and its contents were shocking. It spoke of a plot, a conspiracy to overthrow the king, and Thomas's involvement in it. But the letter also revealed something else. Thomas had discovered the truth about the plot, and he was planning to expose it to the king. He had been betrayed, set up to take the fall for a conspiracy he was trying to prevent. Cecily's hands trembled as she read the letter, her eyes filling with tears. Her brother had not been a traitor. He had been a hero, trying to save the king, and he had been murdered for it. And she, at last, held the proof in her shaking hands, the proof he had tried to hide. A sudden noise broke the silence, a warning. She had to escape before being found. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Coil. Cecily quickly gathered the letter and other relevant documents, concealing them within her gown. She extinguished the oil lamp, plunging the chamber back into darkness. She carefully made her way back through the hidden passage, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had found the truth, but she knew she was now in even greater danger. As she emerged from behind the tapestry, she nearly collided with a figure standing in the library. Sir Nicholas Warwick. He stood there, silhouetted against the faint light from the corridor, his expression unreadable. He had been waiting for her. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What are you doing here, in the dead of night?" Cecily's mind raced. She had to think fast. She couldn't reveal what she had found. Not yet. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I sought solace in books." He studied her for a moment, his eyes piercing. "The library is a dangerous place to wander alone, Lady Cecily. There are secrets hidden within these walls." "I am aware of that, Sir Nicholas," Cecily replied, her voice gaining strength. "But I am not afraid of secrets." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. "Are you not?" he asked softly. "Or are you merely adept at concealing them?" Cecily met his gaze, her heart pounding. She knew he suspected something. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the urgency in her movements. "We all have secrets, Sir Nicholas," Cecily said, her voice carefully controlled. "Even you." His eyes flickered for a moment, a hint of something surprise, perhaps crossing his face. He didn't reply, but his silence was more telling than any words could have been. "I am merely seeking peace, Sir Nicholas," Cecily continued. "A respite from the pressures of court." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well, Lady Cecily," he said. "But be warned. The castle is full of shadows, and not all of them are friendly." He turned and walked away, leaving Cecily standing there, her heart racing, her mind reeling. She knew she had narrowly escaped exposure, but she also knew that Warwick's suspicions had been aroused. She had to be more careful than ever. She returned to her chamber, her mind ablaze with the implications of her discovery. She had proof of her brother's innocence, but she also had evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the court. She didn't know who she could trust. She confided in Alara, sharing the contents of the letter and the other documents. Alara listened intently, her eyes filled with concern and a growing fear. "My lady," Alara said softly, "this is dangerous. You cannot trust anyone at court." Cecily nodded. "I know, but I have to find a way to expose the truth, to clear Thomas's name and bring the conspirators to justice." "But how?" Alara asked. "You are surrounded by enemies." Cecily thought for a moment, her mind racing. She needed an ally, someone she could trust, someone with the power and influence to help her. But who? She thought of Lord Barristan, who had shared his own suspicions about Thomas. But he was from the north, a region rife with rebellion, and she couldn't be sure of his loyalty. She thought of the king, but he was surrounded by advisors, many of whom might be involved in the conspiracy. She couldn't risk revealing her discovery to him directly. Not yet. And then she thought of Sir Nicholas Warwick. He was the king's most trusted knight, his silent blade. He was known for his unwavering loyalty, his ruthless efficiency in rooting out treachery. But he was also a mystery, a man of few words and hidden depths. Could she trust him? It was a gamble, a dangerous one. But she was running out of options. She had to take a chance. The next day, Cecily sought out Warwick, finding him in the training yard, practicing his swordsmanship. He moved with a grace and power that was both mesmerizing and intimidating. She waited until he had finished, then approached him, her heart pounding. "Sir Nicholas," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "may I speak with you?" "Privately." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his eyes fixed on her. "Of course, Lady Cecily," he replied. He led her to a secluded alcove, away from the prying eyes and ears of the court. Cecily took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "I have discovered something disturbing," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Something that concerns my brother, Thomas, and a conspiracy against the king." She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but his expression remained guarded. "Go on," he said, his voice calm. Cecily recounted her discovery in the hidden chamber, sharing the contents of the letter and the other documents. She watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of betrayal, any hint of deception. He listened intently, his expression unchanging. When she had finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on hers. "Why are you telling me this, Lady Cecily?" he asked finally, his voice low and intense. Cecily met his gaze, her heart pounding. "Because I believe you are a man of honor, Sir Nicholas," she said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. "Because I believe you are loyal to the king. And because I need your help." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching. Then, a flicker of something trust, perhaps, crossed his face. He nodded slowly. "I will help you, Lady Cecily," he said, his voice firm. "But we must be careful. The serpent's coil is tight, and we are walking into its den." He reached for her hand and gave it a firm, unexpected squeeze. "Trust me." Chapter 8. Beneath the Silver Moon. Trust. It was a fragile, precious thing in the viper's nest of the court. Cecily had placed her life, her family's honor, and the fate of the kingdom in the hands of Sir Nicholas Warwick. It was a gamble, a desperate act of faith in a man she barely knew, a man who had been her shadow, her jailer, her constant source of unease. But in his eyes, in his voice, in the firm grip of his hand, she had seen something that gave her hope. A glimmer of honor, a spark of integrity, a hint of the man beneath the armor. They began their investigation in secret, meeting in the dead of night, in hidden corners of the castle, away from the prying eyes and ears of the court. They pored over the documents Cecily had found, piecing together the fragments of the conspiracy, identifying the key players, unraveling the web of deceit. They discovered that the conspiracy was far more extensive than Cecily had initially imagined. It involved not only Lord Barristan but several other high-ranking nobles, including some of the king's closest advisors. The conspirators were planning to assassinate the king and place a puppet ruler on the throne, a ruler who would be sympathetic to their cause, a cause that threatened to plunge the kingdom into civil war. Warwick, with his knowledge of the court and his network of informants, was invaluable in their investigation. He uncovered hidden messages, intercepted coded letters, and identified the conspirators' secret meeting places. He moved with a quiet efficiency, a silent predator stalking his prey. Cecily, with her sharp mind and her intimate knowledge of the noble families involved, provided crucial insights into the conspirators' motives and relationships. She was able to decipher the hidden meanings in their conversations, to identify the subtle clues that others overlooked. As they worked together, Cecily found herself increasingly drawn to Warwick. She admired his strength, his courage, his unwavering dedication to justice. She saw a vulnerability in him, a sadness that mirrored her own, a pain that he kept carefully hidden. She learned more about his past, about the loss of his betrothed, about the burden of his duty to the king. She saw the toll that his life had taken on him, the sacrifices he had made, the loneliness he endured. And she realized that she was falling in love with him. It was a forbidden love, a dangerous love, a love that could never be. She was a noblewoman, a widow, a pawn in the political game. He was a knight, a warrior, bound by his oath to the king. Their worlds were separated by an unbridgeable chasm. But she couldn't deny the feelings that grew stronger with each passing day, with each shared glance, with each whispered conversation in the darkness. One night, they met in the castle gardens, beneath the silver glow of the full moon. The air was cold, crisp, and the snow-covered landscape shimmered with an ethereal beauty. They stood in silence for a moment, their breath misting in the cold air. Warwick turned to Cecily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. "This is dangerous, Cecily," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "We are playing with fire." Cecily met his gaze, her heart aching. "I know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But we cannot turn back. We must see this through." He nodded, his jaw tight. "We will," he said. "But we must be prepared for the consequences." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through her. "You are brave, Cecily," he said, his voice husky. "Braver than anyone I know." Cecily's eyes filled with tears. "And you are kind, Nicholas," she whispered. "Kinder than anyone knows." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. She could feel his breath on her skin, the warmth of his body radiating through the cold night air. He began, his voice faltering. But before he could finish, a sound startled them. The rustle of footsteps on the snow. They sprang apart, their hearts pounding. A guard patrol was approaching. They had been seen. Warwick quickly stepped in front of Cecily, shielding her from view. He spoke to the guards in a calm, authoritative voice, explaining that he was merely escorting Lady Cecily back to her chamber. The guards, recognizing Warwick, saluted and departed. But the moment was broken. The spell was shattered. Warwick turned back to Cecily, his expression guarded. "We must be more careful," he said, his voice tight. "We cannot afford to be seen together like this." Cecily nodded, her heart sinking. She knew he was right. Their secret meetings, their stolen moments, were becoming too risky. They parted ways, their hearts heavy with unspoken emotions. Cecily returned to her chamber, her mind reeling. She knew that their love was impossible, that it could never be. But she couldn't deny the feelings that consumed her, the longing that ached within her soul. She knew their time was limited, and the danger closer than ever. Chapter 9. Oaths of Blood. The net was tightening. Warwick and Cecily knew they had to act quickly. The conspirators were growing bolder, their plans nearing fruition. They had identified the date of the planned assassination, the upcoming feast of St. Michael, a day when the king would be most vulnerable, surrounded by his court, his guards seemingly down. They had also discovered the identity of the mastermind behind the conspiracy, Lord Elmsworth, Cecily's own uncle. The revelation struck Cecily like a physical blow. She had always known her uncle was ambitious, ruthless, but she had never imagined he was capable of such treachery. The thought that her own blood, her own family, was plotting to kill the king filled her with a mixture of horror and shame. She confided in Warwick, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what to do, Nicholas, she said. He is my uncle, my family. How can I betray him? Warwick looked at her, his expression filled with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. He knew the pain she was feeling, the conflict that tore at her soul. You are not betraying him, Cecily, he said softly. He has betrayed you. He has betrayed the king. He has betrayed his oath. He placed a hand on her arm, his touch gentle and reassuring. You have a duty, Cecily, he continued. A duty to the king, to the realm, to your brother's memory. You must do what is right, even if it is painful. Cecily knew he was right. She couldn't allow her personal feelings to cloud her judgment. She had to put aside her loyalty to her family and embrace her loyalty to the truth. They decided to confront Elmsworth, to expose his treachery to the king. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. Elmsworth was a powerful man with many allies at court. They needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would convince the king of his guilt. They returned to the hidden chamber in the library, searching for more documents, more clues that would solidify their case. They found a secret compartment, hidden behind a bookshelf, containing a cache of letters, signed by Elmsworth and the other conspirators, detailing their plans for the assassination. It was the proof they needed. But as they were leaving the chamber, they were discovered. A group of armed guards, led by Lord Barristan, blocked their path. Barristan's face was a mask of cold fury. So, he said, his voice dripping with venom, the rumors were true. You have betrayed us, Lady Cecily. Cecily stood her ground, her chin lifted, her eyes defiant. I have betrayed no one, Lord Barristan, she replied. I am loyal to the king. Barristan sneered. Loyalty is a fleeting virtue, Lady Cecily, especially in these times. He signaled to his guards, who moved to seize Cecily and Warwick. But Warwick was faster. He drew his sword, his movements swift and deadly. He engaged the guards, his blade a blur of steel, his skill unmatched. Cecily watched in awe and terror as Warwick fought, his courage and determination inspiring her. He was outnumbered, but he fought with the ferocity of a lion, protecting her from harm. But the odds were against them. More guards arrived, alerted by the sounds of the fight. Warwick was wounded, a deep gash on his arm, but he continued to fight, his resolve unwavering. Cecily knew they couldn't win. She had to do something. She grabbed a dagger from one of the fallen guards and charged at Barristan, her heart pounding with fear and desperation. She managed to graze his arm, drawing blood, but he quickly disarmed her, his grip like iron. He held her captive, his dagger pressed against her throat. Drop your sword, Warwick, Barristan commanded, his voice cold and menacing. Or the lady dies. Warwick hesitated, his eyes filled with pain and conflict. He looked at Cecily, his gaze conveying a silent apology. He knew he had no choice. He lowered his sword, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The guards seized him, binding his hands. Barristan smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. You have made a grave mistake, Lady Cecily, he said. You have chosen the wrong side. He dragged Cecily away, leaving Warwick a prisoner of the guards, his face a mask of despair. Cecily felt a cold dread wash over her. All felt truly lost now. She knew Elmsworth had won. Chapter 10. The Price of Silence. Cecily was imprisoned in a cold, damp cell deep within the castle dungeons. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and despair, and the only sound was the dripping of water and the occasional scurrying of rats. She was alone, stripped of her finery, her body aching, her spirit broken. She thought of Warwick, his wounded arm, his defeated posture, his silent apology. She feared for his life, for the fate that awaited him at the hands of the conspirators. She blamed herself for his capture, for dragging him into her dangerous quest for truth. She also thought of her brother, Thomas, his memory now a beacon of hope in the darkness. She had failed to clear his name, to expose the conspiracy that had cost him his life. She had failed her family, her kingdom, herself. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity. Cecily lost track of time, her mind drifting between despair and a flicker of defiant hope. She replayed every encounter with Warwick, every stolen glance, every whispered word, clinging to the memory of his touch, his strength, his unwavering loyalty. Finally, the heavy iron door of her cell creaked open. Lord Elmsworth stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. He was accompanied by 2 guards, their faces grim and unyielding. "Cecily," Elmsworth said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you have disappointed me. You have betrayed your family, your blood." Cecily met his gaze, her chin lifted, her eyes defiant. "I have betrayed no one, uncle," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "You are the traitor. You are the one who has plotted against the king." Elmsworth sneered. "The king is a fool," he said. "He is weak, indecisive. He is unfit to rule. We are saving the kingdom from his incompetence." "You are saving nothing," Cecily retorted. "You are destroying everything. You are driven by ambition, by greed, by a lust for power." Elmsworth stepped closer, his eyes filled with a cold, menacing light. "You know too much, Cecily," he said softly. "Far too much. And you are far too dangerous to be left alive." Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he meant it. He was going to kill her, silence her forever. "You will not get away with this, uncle," Cecily said, her voice unwavering. "The truth will come out. Warwick will expose you." Elmsworth laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh. "Warwick is a dead man," he said. "He will be executed at dawn, along with the other traitors." Cecily felt a cold dread wash over her. Warwick was going to die, and she was powerless to stop it. "You are a monster, uncle," Cecily whispered, her voice filled with despair. Elmsworth smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Perhaps," he said. "But I am a monster who wins." He turned to the guards. "Take her away," he commanded. "Prepare her for transport. She will be sent to a remote convent, where she can do no further harm." Cecily knew what that meant. She was to be killed, her body disposed of, her death made to look like an accident. The guards seized her, dragging her from the cell. She struggled, but their grip was too strong. She was led through the dark corridors of the dungeon, her heart filled with a cold, numbing fear. As they were passing a narrow alcove, she saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, his face hidden by a hood. It was Warwick. He had escaped. He moved with a swiftness and silence that belied his wounded arm. He dispatched the guards with a few brutal blows, his movements precise and deadly. He turned to Cecily, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Cecily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. How did you escape?" she whispered. "I had help," he replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "A loyal friend in the guard ranks. One who still believes in honor." He quickly unbound her hands. "We must leave this place, Cecily," he said. "We must expose Elmsworth and the other conspirators before it is too late." He led her through a maze of secret passages, hidden corridors that only he knew. He moved with a confidence and determination that gave Cecily hope. They emerged from the castle, into the cold night air. The feast of St. Michael was fast approaching. They had very little time. The fate of the king and the kingdom rested on their shoulders and in the dark, silent conspiracy of their hearts. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. They fled into the night, seeking refuge in the sprawling forest that surrounded the castle. The trees, their branches bare and skeletal, offered a meager concealment from the searching eyes of Elmsworth's men. The cold wind whipped through the forest, biting at their exposed skin, mirroring the chill of fear that gripped Cecily's heart. Warwick, despite his wound, moved with a determined purpose, guiding Cecily through the treacherous terrain. He knew the forest well, its hidden paths and secret trails, a knowledge gleaned from years of hunting and patrolling the king's lands. Cecily, exhausted and bruised, struggled to keep pace, her body aching, her spirit weary. But the thought of the impending assassination, of the king's life hanging in the balance, spurred her onward. They found shelter in a small, abandoned hunting lodge, its walls crumbling, its roof leaking. It was a far cry from the opulent chambers of a castle, but it offered a temporary sanctuary from the pursuing forces. Warwick tended to his wound, using strips of cloth torn from Cecily's gown to bind the gash on his arm. He worked with a practiced efficiency, his face set in a grim determination. Cecily watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. She saw the pain in his eyes, the toll that the fight had taken on him. She saw the burden of responsibility he carried, the weight of the kingdom's fate resting on his shoulders. "You should rest, Nicholas," Cecily said softly, her voice filled with concern. "You are injured." Warwick shook his head. "There is no time for rest, Cecily," he replied. "We must reach the king before it is too late." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken emotion. I failed you, Cecily," he said, his voice hoarse. "I allowed myself to be captured. I put you in danger." Cecily reached out and gently touched his arm. "You did not fail me, Nicholas," she said. "You saved me. You risked your life for me." He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes searching. "I would do anything for you, Cecily," he said softly. "Anything." Cecily's heart ached with a love that was both forbidden and undeniable. She leaned closer, her face inches from his. "And I for you, Nicholas," she whispered. Their lips met, a tentative, hesitant touch at first, then a passionate embrace. It was a kiss born of desperation, of fear, of a love that had blossomed in the midst of danger and deceit. It was a kiss that spoke of unspoken promises, of a future they might never have. They broke apart, their breath mingling in the cold air. The reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They were fugitives, hunted by a powerful enemy, their lives hanging in the balance. They spent the rest of the night huddled together for warmth, sharing stories, whispering secrets, finding solace in each other's presence. They spoke of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Warwick told Cecily more about his betrothed, Alara, a woman he had loved deeply, a woman who had been taken from him by a sudden illness. He spoke of the guilt he carried, the feeling that he had failed to protect her. Cecily, in turn, told Warwick more about her brother, Thomas, about his dreams, his ambitions, his unwavering loyalty to the king. She spoke of the pain of his loss, the injustice of his death, the burden of the secrets she had carried. As they spoke, Cecily realized that they were bound together not only by their shared danger, but by their shared grief, their shared sense of loss, their shared desire for justice. They were two wounded souls, finding solace and strength in each other's arms. As dawn approached, they prepared to leave the lodge, to make their final, desperate attempt to reach the king. They knew the odds were against them, that they were facing a seemingly insurmountable challenge. But they were not alone. They had each other, and they had the truth. As they stepped out of the lodge, into the pale light of dawn, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Alara, Cecily's maid, her face etched with worry. "My lady," Alara said, her voice trembling, "I have been searching for you. I have news." She hesitated, her gaze shifting to Warwick. "The king," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "he knows." Cecily and Warwick exchanged a look of stunned surprise. "Knows?" Cecily asked. "Knows what?" "About the plot," Alara replied. "About Lord Elmsworth. A loyal knight overheard the conspirators and warned the king." Cecily's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and hope. The king was safe. The assassination had been averted. But how? Alara's words seemed strangely familiar, and the weight of the loyal knight lingered heavily in her mind. Chapter 12. A Dance of Deception. Alara's news was a double-edged sword. The immediate threat to the king's life was averted, but the conspirators were still at large, and Elmsworth, now aware that his plot had been discovered, would be even more dangerous. The loyal knight Alara mentioned remained a mystery, a potential ally or a hidden enemy playing a deeper game. "We must return to the castle," Warwick said, his voice firm. "We must ensure the king is truly safe and help apprehend the remaining conspirators." Cecily nodded, her mind racing. She trusted Alara implicitly, but the news felt incomplete, unsettling. The pieces didn't quite fit. They returned to the castle under the cover of early morning mist, Alara guiding them through a little-known servants' entrance. The castle was in a state of controlled chaos. Guards were everywhere, searching for the escaped prisoners and the remaining conspirators. The Feast of St. Michael had been cancelled, and the court was in lockdown. They managed to reach Cecily's chamber undetected, where they could regroup and plan their next move. Alara, ever resourceful, had procured fresh clothes and bandages for Warwick's wound. As Warwick changed, Cecily questioned Alara more closely about the loyal knight. "Alara," Cecily said, her voice low and urgent. "Who is this knight? Did you see him? Did you hear his name?" Alara hesitated, her brow furrowed in concentration. I did not see him, my lady," she said. "I only heard whispers." The guards were speaking of a knight who had overheard Lord Elmsworth and Lord Barristan discussing their plans. They said he alerted the king's personal guard. "But did you hear his name?" Cecily pressed. Alara shook her head. "No, my lady. I only heard them say he was close to the king." The vagueness of the information troubled Cecily. Close to the king could describe dozens of knights, including some who were known to be ambitious and untrustworthy. Warwick, now dressed in plain clothes, joined them. "We cannot rely on rumors," he said. "We must find this knight ourselves and determine his true allegiance." He turned to Cecily. "You know the court better than I do," he said. "Who among the king's inner circle would be most likely to overhear such a conversation and act on it?" Cecily thought for a moment, running through the list of knights and nobles who had access to the king. She considered their reputations, their known loyalties, their past actions. "There are several possibilities," she said. "Lord Ashford, Sir Gareth, Sir Reginald, but none of them seem entirely trustworthy." She paused, a sudden thought striking her. "There is one other," she said. "Sir Callan. He was a friend of my brother, Thomas. He was always loyal to the king, but he has been distant since Thomas's death." Warwick nodded. "It is worth investigating," he said. "We must find him." They decided to split up, to cover more ground. Warwick would search the barracks and the training yards, where Sir Callan was most likely to be found. Cecily, with Alara's help, would search the more public areas of the castle, questioning the servants and courtiers, trying to glean any information about Sir Callan's whereabouts and recent actions. Cecily, disguised as a serving maid, moved through the castle corridors, her senses alert. She listened to conversations, observed faces, searched for any clue that might lead her to Sir Callan. She learned that Sir Callan had been seen arguing with Lord Elmsworth just hours before the plot was discovered. She also learned that he had been absent from his usual duties since the lockdown, his whereabouts unknown. The information was both encouraging and alarming. It suggested that Sir Callan might indeed be the loyal knight, but his disappearance raised concerns about his safety. Had Elmsworth discovered his betrayal and silenced him? Cecily found Alara waiting for her in a secluded alcove. "My lady," Alara said, her voice urgent, "I have found him. Sir Callan. He is in the chapel." Cecily's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. The chapel. A place of sanctuary, of prayer, of confession. She followed Alara to the chapel, her steps silent on the stone floor. The chapel was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering candles on the altar and the stained glass windows depicting scenes of saints and angels. They found Sir Callan kneeling before the altar, his head bowed in prayer. He was a young man, with a strong, handsome face, but his expression was etched with sorrow and guilt. He was also very distinctly alone. Cecily approached him cautiously. "Sir Callan," she said softly. He started, turning to face her, his eyes wide with surprise. He recognized her immediately, despite her disguise. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here?" We need to talk, Cecily replied. About my brother, Thomas, and about the plot against the king. As he spoke, a sound echoed, a scraping, a rustling. Warwick hadn't found Kaelin, Cecily realized. He was walking into a trap. Chapter 13. The lion's den. Cecily's warning came too late. As Warwick entered the training yard, searching for Sir Kaelin, he was ambushed. A group of Elmsworth's men, armed and ready, sprang from the shadows, surrounding him. He was outnumbered, his wounded arm a hindrance, but he fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion. He drew his sword, his movements swift and deadly, despite the pain in his arm. He parried blows, dodged attacks, and managed to strike down several of his assailants. But the odds were against him. He was tiring, his strength ebbing, his movements becoming slower. He knew he couldn't win, but he wouldn't surrender. He would fight to his last breath, protecting Cecily, defending the king, upholding his oath. Meanwhile, in the chapel, Cecily confronted Sir Kaelin, her voice filled with a mixture of suspicion and hope. Sir Kaelin, she said, did you warn the king about the plot? Were you the loyal knight? Sir Kaelin hesitated, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. He looked at Cecily, then at Alara, his gaze lingering on the maid's face. I did, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I overheard Elmsworth and Barristan discussing their plans. I knew I had to act. But why did you disappear? Cecily asked. Why didn't you come forward? Sir Kaelin looked down, his face etched with guilt. I was afraid, he said. I knew Elmsworth would seek revenge. I didn't know who to trust. You could have trusted me, Cecily said, her voice filled with a hint of reproach. You could have trusted Warwick. Sir Kaelin looked up, his eyes meeting Cecily's. Warwick? He said, his voice filled with surprise. He is alive? I thought before he could finish. The chapel doors burst open, and a group of Elmsworth's men stormed in, led by Lord Barristan. Barristan's face was a mask of cold fury. So, he said, his voice dripping with venom, the little birds have gathered. How convenient. He signaled to his men, who moved to seize Cecily, Alara, and Sir Kaelin. But Sir Kaelin, despite his fear, reacted with surprising speed. He drew a hidden dagger and lunged at Barristan, his movements fueled by a desperate courage. He managed to graze Barristan's arm, drawing blood, but Barristan quickly overpowered him, disarming him with a brutal blow. He held Sir Kaelin captive, his dagger pressed against the young knight's throat. Now, Lady Cecily, Barristan said, his voice cold and menacing, you will tell me where Warwick is, or your friend here dies. Cecily's mind raced. She couldn't betray Warwick, but she couldn't let Sir Kaelin die. She was trapped, caught in a deadly game with no escape. But then, a voice echoed through the chapel, a voice filled with authority and righteous anger. Release them, Barristan, the voice commanded. Your treachery ends here. It was King Edmund. He stood at the chapel entrance, flanked by his royal guard, his face a mask of regal fury. He had arrived just in time. He had not been idle, Cecily now realized. Barristan, stunned by the king's sudden appearance, hesitated. He looked at the king, then at Cecily, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Your Majesty, Barristan stammered, this is a misunderstanding. The king's gaze was unwavering. There is no misunderstanding, Barristan, he said, his voice cold and hard. You have plotted against me. You have betrayed your oath. You will pay the price. He signaled to his guards, who moved to seize Barristan and his men. Barristan, realizing he was defeated, surrendered, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The king turned to Cecily, his expression softening slightly. Lady Cecily, he said, you have shown great courage and loyalty. You have saved my life, and the life of my kingdom. Cecily bowed her head, her heart filled with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Your Majesty, she whispered. The king then looked at Sir Kaelin, who was being helped to his feet by one of the guards. Sir Kaelin, he said, you have also shown great courage. You have redeemed yourself. Sir Kaelin bowed his head, his eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you, your majesty," he whispered. The king then turned his gaze towards the training yard, his expression hardening. "Now," he said, "we must deal with Elmsworth and his remaining dogs." Cecily knew what that meant. Warwick was still in danger. She had to reach him, to warn him. She rushed from the chapel, her heart pounding with fear and desperation, the king's guard close on her heels. The lion, it turned out, was already out of its den, and a reckoning was at hand. Chapter 14. Torn Banners. Cecily raced towards the training yard, her heart pounding with a desperate urgency. She could hear the clang of steel, the shouts of men, the sounds of a fierce battle raging within. She knew Warwick was fighting for his life, against overwhelming odds. She burst into the training yard, her eyes scanning the scene of chaos. Warwick was still standing, his sword bloodied, his body battered, but he was surrounded by Elmsworth's men, their swords poised to strike. Elmsworth himself stood at the edge of the yard, watching the fight with a cruel, triumphant smile. "Warwick!" Cecily cried, her voice filled with anguish. Warwick turned his head, his eyes meeting Cecily's. He saw her standing there, her face filled with fear and determination. He saw the king's guards rushing into the yard, their swords drawn, their faces grim. He knew the tide had turned. He had survived. They had won. A flicker of hope, of relief, crossed his face. He lowered his sword, his shoulders slumping in exhaustion. Elmsworth's men, seeing the king's guards, hesitated, their resolve faltering. Elmsworth, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, realized his plot had failed. He had lost. "Kill them!" Elmsworth screamed, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Kill them all!" But his men, demoralized and outnumbered, refused to obey. They dropped their swords, surrendering to the king's guards. Elmsworth, seeing his forces collapse, turned to flee, his face a mask of terror. But Warwick, despite his wounds, moved with surprising speed. He intercepted Elmsworth, blocking his escape. "It is over, Elmsworth," Warwick said, his voice cold and hard. "Your treachery ends here." Elmsworth, cornered and desperate, drew a hidden dagger and lunged at Warwick, his movements fueled by a desperate rage. But Warwick, despite his exhaustion, was too quick. He parried the blow, disarming Elmsworth with a swift, decisive move. He held Elmsworth captive, his sword pointed at the traitor's throat. Elmsworth, his face pale with fear, his body trembling, knew he was defeated. The king's guards seized Elmsworth, binding his hands. The king himself entered the training yard, his face a mask of regal fury. "Elmsworth," the king said, his voice booming across the yard, "you have betrayed your oath. You have plotted against your king. You will pay the price for your treachery." Elmsworth, his head bowed in shame, did not reply. He knew his fate was sealed. The king turned to Warwick, his expression softening slightly. "Sir Nicholas," he said, "you have shown great courage and loyalty. You have saved my life, and the life of my kingdom. I am forever in your debt." Warwick bowed his head, his body swaying with exhaustion. "Thank you, your majesty," he whispered. The king then looked at Cecily, his gaze filled with gratitude and admiration. "Lady Cecily," he said, "you have also shown great courage. You have risked your life to uncover this conspiracy. You have proven your loyalty, beyond any doubt." Cecily bowed her head, her heart filled with relief and a profound sense of accomplishment. "Thank you, your majesty," she whispered. The king ordered Elmsworth and the other conspirators to be taken to the dungeons, to await their trial and punishment. He then ordered his healers to tend to Warwick's wounds. Cecily rushed to Warwick's side, her heart filled with concern. She helped him to a nearby bench, her hands trembling as she examined his wounds. "You are hurt, Nicholas," she said, her voice filled with anguish. "You need rest." Warwick looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken emotion. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. "I am alive, Cecily," he said softly. "Thanks to you." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "We did it, Cecily," he whispered. "We saved the kingdom." Cecily's eyes filled with tears Tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love that had blossomed in the midst of danger and deceit. "Yes," she whispered. "We did." Their lips met, a passionate embrace, a kiss that sealed their victory, their survival, their love. It was a kiss that spoke of a future they could now share, a future free from fear, from secrets, from the shadows of the court. The banners of the conspirators lay torn upon the ground, and a new, brighter one seemed to rise within the castle walls. Chapter 15. The Heart's Citadel. The aftermath of the failed conspiracy brought a wave of relief and a sense of renewal to the court. The king, shaken but resolute, ordered a thorough investigation, rooting out any remaining pockets of dissent and rewarding those who had proven their loyalty. The Feast of St. Michael, initially cancelled, was reinstated, transformed from a celebration of the realm's strength to a celebration of its resilience, its survival, its triumph over treachery. Warwick, his wounds tended to, recovered quickly, his strength and determination undiminished. He was hailed as a hero, his bravery lauded by the king and the court. But he shunned the accolades, preferring to remain in the shadows, his focus on his duty, his loyalty unwavering. Cecily, too, was praised for her courage and her role in uncovering the conspiracy. She was no longer seen as a mere pawn in the political game, a wealthy widow to be married off for strategic gain. She had earned respect, admiration, and a newfound freedom. But the greatest change was within Cecily herself. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and emerged stronger, more confident, more determined to forge her own destiny. She had found her voice, her purpose, her strength. And she had found love. The love between Cecily and Warwick, born in the midst of danger and deceit, blossomed in the aftermath of the failed conspiracy. It was a love that had been tested, forged in the crucible of adversity, and it emerged stronger, more resilient, more profound. But it was still a love fraught with challenges. Their different social standings, the rigid rules of the court, the expectations of their families, all stood as obstacles to their happiness. Warwick, ever mindful of his duty and his oath to the king, struggled with the conflict between his love for Cecily and his loyalty to the crown. He knew that a relationship between a knight and a noblewoman, especially one who had been widowed by a lord, was frowned upon, almost forbidden. Cecily, too, was aware of the obstacles, of the whispers and judgments that would inevitably follow them. But she was no longer willing to be bound by the constraints of society, by the expectations of others. She had fought for her freedom, for her right to choose her own path, and she would not surrender it now. One evening, they met in the castle gardens, beneath the silver glow of the full moon, the same place where their love had first blossomed. The air was crisp and cold, the scent of winter in the air, but the warmth of their feelings for each other defied the chill. Warwick took Cecily's hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Cecily," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of love and concern, "we must speak of our future." Cecily met his gaze, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I know, Nicholas," she replied. "It will not be easy." He nodded, his jaw tight. "There will be objections," he said. "Whispers. Judgments. My position at court, it could be compromised." Cecily placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "I do not care about whispers, Nicholas," she said, her voice firm. "I do not care about judgments. I care about you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love. "And I care about you, Cecily," he said softly. "More than anything." He hesitated, his gaze searching. "But I will not ask you to sacrifice your standing, your reputation for me," he said. "I will not ask you to give up everything you have for a love that may be impossible." Cecily smiled, a radiant, defiant smile. "You are not asking me to sacrifice anything, Nicholas," she said. "You are offering me something far greater. You are offering me your love." She reached out and gently touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, the scars that bore witness to his courage and his loyalty. "I've built my own citadel, Nicholas," she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "A citadel of the heart. and within its walls, there is only room for you." Warwick's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, of relief, of a love that had overcome all obstacles. He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his heart overflowing with emotion. "Then let's build our future together, Cecily," he whispered. "A future where love conquers all." Their kiss was a promise, a vow, a testament to their unwavering love. It was a kiss that defied the constraints of society, the expectations of the court, the shadows of the past. It was a kiss that spoke of a future filled with hope, with joy, with a love that would endure, a love that would build and protect their very own, heartfelt citadel. The walls of the castle, once a prison, now felt like protective arms embracing their newfound future. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. Despite the victory at court, the embers of rebellion still smoldered in the Northern Territories. Lord Barristan's capture had dealt a blow to the movement, but the underlying grievances that fueled the unrest remained: heavy taxes, unjust laws, and a growing resentment towards the king's perceived indifference to the plight of his northern subjects. News reached the court of isolated uprisings, of villages raided, of royal garrisons attacked. The king, determined to quell the rebellion and restore order, decided to send a force north, led by Sir Nicholas Warwick. The decision was both a testament to Warwick's skill and loyalty and a source of profound anxiety for Cecily. She knew the dangers of war, the risks that Warwick would face, the possibility that he might not return. She pleaded with him to be careful, to take no unnecessary risks, to remember that he had a future to return to, a future with her. Warwick reassured her, promising to return, to fight not only for the king but for their love, for the future they had vowed to build together. He held her close, his embrace tight, his words filled with a mixture of love and determination. "I will return, Cecily," he said, his voice firm. "I swear it. I will fight for our future, for our love. I will come back to you." He kissed her, a passionate, desperate kiss, a kiss that spoke of unspoken fears, of unwavering love, of a promise that would bind them together, even in the face of separation and danger. The departure of the army was a somber affair. Knights in shining armor, their banners held high, marched out of the castle gates, their faces grim, their hearts filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Cecily watched from the castle walls, her heart aching, her eyes fixed on Warwick's retreating figure. She offered a silent prayer for his safety, for his return, for the preservation of their love. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Cecily waited anxiously for news from the north, her days filled with a mixture of hope and dread. She received occasional letters from Warwick, brief, hurried messages that spoke of skirmishes, of victories, of setbacks, but always ending with a reaffirmation of his love and his promise to return. She found solace in her duties at court, assisting the king in his efforts to address the grievances of the Northern Territories. She used her newfound influence to advocate for reforms, for fairer laws, for a more compassionate approach to governance. She became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for justice, a testament to the transformative power of love and adversity. She also spent time with Sir Callan, who had recovered from his injuries and was now serving in the king's personal guard. They shared a bond, forged in the crucible of the conspiracy, a friendship born of shared danger and mutual respect. Callan, grateful for Cecily's intervention and Warwick's bravery, became a loyal friend and confidant. One evening, as Cecily was walking in the castle gardens, she received a message from the king. He requested her presence in the great hall. Her heart pounded with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. Had news arrived from the north? Was Warwick safe? She entered the great hall, her steps measured and deliberate, her gaze fixed on the king. He sat on his throne, his face etched with a mixture of concern and something else. Something that looked like relief. "Lady Cecily," the king said, his voice booming across the hall, "we have received news from the north." Cecily's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. "Is he Sir Nicholas?" She stammered, unable to complete the question. The king smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Sir Nicholas is well, Lady Cecily," he said. "And he has achieved a great victory. The rebellion is crushed. Peace has been restored." Cecily felt a wave of relief wash over her, so profound that her knees nearly buckled. Warwick was safe. He had survived. He was coming home. "But that is not all," the king continued, his eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Sir Nicholas has also negotiated a settlement with the northern lords. A settlement that addresses their grievances, that promises fairer treatment, that lays the foundation for a lasting peace." Cecily was stunned. Warwick had not only crushed the rebellion, he had also achieved a diplomatic triumph, a feat that had eluded the king's advisors for years. "He is a remarkable man, Your Majesty," Cecily said, her voice filled with pride and admiration. The king nodded. "Indeed he is, Lady Cecily," he said. "A man of courage, of loyalty, of wisdom." He paused, his gaze shifting to Cecily's face. "And he has requested something of me, Lady Cecily," he continued. "Something that concerns you." Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was coming. The king smiled, a knowing, benevolent smile. "Sir Nicholas has asked for your hand in marriage, Lady Cecily," he said. "And I have granted his request." Cecily's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, of relief, of a love that had conquered all obstacles. She had won. They had won. The flames of rebellion were extinguished, and from the ashes rose not only a renewed kingdom, but a love that had proved itself stronger, more resilient. Chapter 17. A Warrior's Resolve. Warwick's return was a triumphant procession. The gates of the castle swung open to welcome the victorious army, banners flying, trumpets blaring, the cheers of the crowd echoing through the courtyards. Cecily, standing on the ramparts beside the king, watched with a heart overflowing with pride and love as Warwick rode at the head of his troops, his armor gleaming in the sunlight, his face etched with the weariness of battle, but also with the glow of victory. He looked up, his eyes searching the crowd, and found her. Their gazes locked, a silent communication that spoke volumes, a reaffirmation of their love, their bond, their shared triumph. He raised his hand in a salute, a gesture that was both a greeting and a promise. The celebrations that followed were grand and joyous. The great hall was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of goblets. Warwick, hailed as a hero, was showered with praise and accolades. But he remained humble, his focus on Cecily, his eyes seeking her out amidst the throng of well-wishers. When they finally had a moment alone, away from the prying eyes of the court, they embraced, a long, passionate embrace that spoke of longing, of relief, of a love that had endured separation and danger. "You kept your promise," Cecily whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You returned." Warwick held her close, his hand stroking her hair. "I told you I would," he said softly. "I would cross any battlefield, face any enemy, to return to you." He told her of the battles, of the hardships, of the challenges he had faced. He spoke of the courage of his men, of the loyalty of his allies, of the brutality of war. But he also spoke of the hope for peace, of the settlement he had negotiated, of the promise of a brighter future for the northern territories. Cecily listened, her heart filled with admiration for his strength, his courage, his unwavering commitment to justice. She saw the toll that the war had taken on him, the weariness in his eyes, the lines of stress etched on his face. But she also saw the fire that still burned within him, the passion for his duty, his love for his kingdom, his love for her. "You are a true warrior, Nicholas," Cecily said, her voice filled with pride. "A warrior of the heart, as well as of the sword." Warwick smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "And you, Cecily," he said, "are my strength, my inspiration, my guiding star. You are the reason I fight, the reason I return." He told her of the king's blessing, of his permission for them to marry. He spoke of his desire to build a life with her, a life away from the intrigues of the court, a life of peace, of love, of family. Cecily's heart overflowed with joy. She had dreamed of this moment, of a future with Warwick, of a love that would transcend all obstacles. But she also knew that their journey was not yet over. There were still challenges to face, obstacles to overcome. The wounds of the rebellion, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. The peace that Warwick had negotiated was fragile, and it would require constant vigilance and effort to maintain. "We will face these challenges together, Nicholas," Cecily said, her voice firm. "We will build our future, brick by brick, with love, with courage, with unwavering resolve." Warwick nodded, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "Together," he said. "Always." Their wedding was a simple, private ceremony held in the castle chapel, the same place where they had faced danger and found solace in each other's presence. Sir Cailan served as a witness, his presence a symbol of their shared past, their shared triumph, their enduring friendship. Alara, Cecily's ever-loyal maid, stood beside her, a silent testament to the unwavering support that had sustained Cecily through her darkest hours. The king, despite his initial reservations about their union, had come to admire Cecily's strength and Warwick's unwavering loyalty. He gave them his blessing, acknowledging that their love was a force for good, a beacon of hope in a kingdom that had been torn by strife. As Cecily and Warwick exchanged their vows, their voices filled with emotion, their eyes locked in a gaze of unwavering love, they knew that their journey was just beginning. They had faced adversity, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. They were ready to face the future, together, as husband and wife, as partners in life, as warriors of the heart, their resolve tempered by the fires of rebellion and strengthened by the enduring power of their love. The king watched on, a soft smile playing on his lips. He finally understood that the truest strength came not from the sword, but the heart. Chapter 18. The Unveiling. Life after the wedding settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment, punctuated by the occasional demands of Warwick's duties and Cecily's growing involvement in the affairs of the realm. They divided their time between the king's court and Ravensshire, Cecily's ancestral home, which Warwick, with the king's blessing, had been granted stewardship of. Ravensshire, once a place of shadows and secrets, began to blossom under their care. Cecily, with Warwick's support, implemented reforms, improving the lives of the tenants, fostering trade, and restoring the castle to its former glory. She found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in her work, using her intelligence and compassion to create a thriving community. Warwick, while still dedicated to his duties as a knight, found a new sense of peace and contentment in his role as husband and protector of Ravensshire. He spent his time training the local militia, overseeing the estate, and, most importantly, cherishing his time with Cecily. Their love deepened with each passing day, a bond forged in adversity, strengthened by shared purpose, and nurtured by mutual respect and unwavering affection. They found joy in the simple things: walks in the gardens, quiet evenings by the fire, shared laughter, whispered secrets. But the past, like a persistent shadow, still lingered. The truth about Thomas's death, while known to Cecily and Warwick, remained a secret from the wider world. The official records still portrayed him as a traitor, and Cecily yearned to clear his name, to restore his honor, to bring closure to that painful chapter of her life. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Cecily and Warwick were riding through the Ravensshire woods, they came across a small, overgrown cemetery, hidden amidst the trees. It was the resting place of generations of Ravensshire ancestors, a place of quiet solitude and forgotten memories. As they dismounted and walked among the weathered tombstones, Cecily noticed a small, unmarked grave, tucked away in a corner of the cemetery. It was a simple mound of earth, covered in moss and wildflowers, with no headstone to identify the person buried there. Cecily felt a sudden, inexplicable pull towards the grave, a sense of recognition, of connection. She knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the contours of the earth. "Who do you think is buried here, Nicholas?" Cecily asked, her voice filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and sadness. Warwick examined the grave, his brow furrowed in thought. "It is difficult to say, Cecily," he replied. "It could be anyone. A servant, a child, a forgotten member of the family." But Cecily felt a growing conviction that this grave held a significance, a connection to her past, to her brother's fate. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it in her bones, a deep, intuitive knowing. She decided to investigate. She enlisted the help of Alara and Sir Callan, who had become a frequent visitor to Ravensshire, his friendship with Cecily and Warwick deepening over time. They consulted old records, questioned the castle elders, searched for any clue that might shed light on the identity of the person buried in the unmarked grave. After days of searching, they finally found a clue, an old, faded entry in the castle records, mentioning a servant who had died suddenly, shortly after Thomas's death. The entry described the servant as loyal and discreet, and mentioned that he had been buried in the family cemetery in an unmarked grave at the request of Lord Elmsworth. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Cecily remembered the loyal knight who Alara had said warned the king. But it hadn't been a knight. It was her brother's loyal servant who had carried the proof of Thomas's innocence to the king. Elmsworth, fearing exposure, had silenced the servant, ordering his death and his secret burial. The realization struck Cecily like a physical blow. Her uncle's treachery ran deeper than she had ever imagined. He had not only plotted against the king, he had also murdered an innocent man to cover his tracks. And Thomas's final act of bravery, to send a servant with the proof, had been almost lost forever. Cecily, Warwick, Alara, and Sir Callan gathered at the unmarked grave, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and determination. Cecily knelt beside the grave, her hand resting on the cold earth. "We know who you are," Cecily said, her voice filled with emotion. "And we will not forget you. We will honor your sacrifice. We will unveil the truth." They decided to exhume the body, to confirm their suspicions, and to provide the servant with a proper burial. They did so in secret, under the cover of darkness, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and reverence. As they carefully unearthed the remains, they found a small, tarnished silver locket, clutched in the skeletal hand of the deceased. The locket was shaped like a raven in flight. Cecily recognized it instantly. It was identical to the one she wore, the one her brother, Thomas, had given her. It was the proof they needed, the final, undeniable evidence of Elmsworth's treachery and Thomas's innocence. The servant's final act and a brother's last, desperate wish. At long last, revealed. Chapter 19. Scars of Loyalty. The discovery of the locket, the tangible proof of Thomas's innocence and Elmsworth's final, brutal act of treachery, ignited a fire within Cecily. She was determined to expose the truth, to clear her brother's name, to bring closure to the long years of pain and uncertainty. She and Warwick presented their findings to the king, laying bare the full extent of Elmsworth's crimes, the conspiracy, the assassination plot, the murder of the loyal servant, and the deliberate suppression of the truth about Thomas's death. The king, initially shocked and disbelieving, was ultimately convinced by the overwhelming evidence. He ordered Elmsworth's immediate arrest and a full public trial, a reckoning that would expose his treachery to the entire realm. Elmsworth, stripped of his power and influence, faced his accusers with a mixture of defiance and despair. He denied the charges, claiming it was all a fabrication, a plot by Cecily and Warwick to usurp his position and seize his wealth. But the evidence was irrefutable. The locket, the testimony of Sir Callan, the record Cecily had found in the hidden chamber, all pointed to his guilt. The trial was a spectacle, a public airing of secrets and betrayals that had long been hidden beneath the surface of courtly life. The nobles, the courtiers, the common people, all watched in stunned silence as the truth was revealed, layer by layer, exposing the rot that had festered within the heart of the kingdom. Cecily, called as a witness, recounted her journey, her discovery of the conspiracy, her alliance with Warwick, her unwavering belief in her brother's innocence. She spoke with clarity, with courage, with a passion that moved even her staunchest critics. Warwick, too, testified, recounting his role in uncovering the plot, his fight to protect the king, his love for Cecily, and his unwavering belief in justice. He spoke with a quiet authority, a stoic dignity that commanded respect. Elmsworth, realizing he was cornered, finally broke down. He confessed his crimes, his voice trembling with fear and remorse. He admitted to plotting against the king, to ordering the murder of the servant, to concealing the truth about Thomas's death. He begged for mercy, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The king, his face a mask of regal fury, pronounced his judgment. Elmsworth was stripped of his titles, his lands, his wealth. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a fate far more lenient than he deserved, a testament to the king's desire for reconciliation and healing. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and jubilation. Justice had been served. The truth had been revealed. The wounds of the past could finally begin to heal. But for Cecily, the victory was bittersweet. While she had cleared her brother's name and brought his murderer to justice, she could not bring him back. The pain of his loss, the years of living under a cloud of suspicion, the scars of betrayal, would always remain. She found solace in Warwick's arms, his love a constant source of strength and comfort. He understood her pain, her grief, her need for closure. He held her close, whispering words of encouragement, of love, of a future free from the shadows of the past. They returned to Ravensshire, to the unmarked grave in the hidden cemetery. They erected a headstone, inscribed with the servant's name and a simple epitaph, "Loyal unto death." They held a small, private ceremony, honoring his sacrifice, his courage, his unwavering devotion to Thomas and the truth. Cecily placed a single white rose on the grave, a symbol of innocence, of remembrance, of a love that transcended death. She felt a sense of peace, of closure, of a burden finally lifted. As they stood there, hand in hand, Cecily and Warwick knew that the scars of loyalty, the wounds of the past, would always be a part of them. But they also knew that they had overcome adversity, that they had found strength in each other, that their love had triumphed over treachery and deceit. They had a future to build, a life to share, a legacy of honor and justice to uphold. And they would face it together, their hearts united, their resolve unwavering, their love a beacon of hope in a world that had been touched by darkness. The scars remained, but they were a testament to survival, not defeat. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The kingdom slowly healed. The wounds inflicted by Elmsworth's treachery and the Northern Rebellion began to mend, replaced by a cautious optimism, a renewed sense of unity, and a growing trust in the king's leadership. Justice had been served, the truth had been revealed, and the realm was moving towards a brighter future. Cecily and Warwick, now firmly established as figures of respect and influence, played a crucial role in this healing process. They used their positions to advocate for reforms, to promote reconciliation, to ensure that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. Warwick, restored to his full honors and responsibilities, continued to serve the king with unwavering loyalty, his skills as a warrior and a diplomat invaluable in maintaining peace and stability. He became a trusted advisor, a confidant, a symbol of integrity and strength. Cecily, no longer bound by the constraints of widowhood or the expectations of the court, found her own voice, her own purpose. She became a champion for the voiceless, a defender of the weak, a voice for justice and compassion. She used her influence to improve the lives of the people of Ravensshire and beyond, earning the respect and admiration of nobles and commoners alike. Their love, forged in adversity, strengthened by shared purpose, blossomed into a deep and enduring bond. They found joy in each other's company, in the simple pleasures of life, in the knowledge that they had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles to be together. But their journey was not without its challenges. The scars of the past, the memories of betrayal and loss, still lingered. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of the lingering pain of old wounds. One evening, As they sat by the fire in their chamber at Ravenshire, Cecily confessed a lingering fear, a doubt that had been gnawing at her. "Nicholas," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of vulnerability and concern, "do you ever regret your choice? Do you ever wish you had chosen a different path, a life less complicated?" Warwick looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. "Never, Cecily," he said softly. "Never. I have faced death. I have endured betrayal. I have witnessed the darkest depths of human nature. But I have also found you. And that makes all the difference." He leaned closer, his lips brushing against hers. "You are my life, Cecily," he whispered. "My love, my partner, my everything. I would choose you, again and again, in any lifetime, in any world." Cecily's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, of relief, of a love that had conquered all doubts, all fears, all obstacles. "And I would choose you, Nicholas," she whispered. "Always." Their kiss was a reaffirmation of their love, a testament to their enduring bond, a promise of a future filled with hope and happiness. Years passed. Cecily and Warwick ruled Ravenshire wisely and justly, their love for each other and their commitment to their people a shining example to the entire kingdom. They raised a family, children who inherited their parents' courage, their compassion, their unwavering sense of justice. The king, recognizing their wisdom and their dedication, often sought their counsel, relying on their judgment and their integrity to guide him in his decisions. Cecily and Warwick became pillars of the realm, symbols of a new era of peace and prosperity. Their love story, once a whispered secret, became a legend, a tale told and retold throughout the kingdom, a testament to the power of love to overcome adversity, to heal wounds, to build a brighter future. It was a love that had been tested by fire, forged in the crucible of betrayal and rebellion, and it had emerged stronger, more resilient, more enduring than ever before. It was a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. A reckoning of love and duty, finally, beautifully balanced. And, together, it was a legacy they would pass on. Epilogue. The sun set on Ravenshire, casting long shadows across the rolling hills and the ancient stone walls of the castle. Cecily and Warwick, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces lined with the passage of time, stood on the ramparts, hand in hand, watching the colors of the twilight sky paint a masterpiece above them. Their children were grown, their own lives unfolding, carrying the legacy of their parents' love and courage into the world. The kingdom was at peace, the wounds of the past healed, the future bright with promise. Cecily leaned her head against Warwick's shoulder, her heart filled with a profound sense of contentment. They had lived a full life, a life of love, of service, of unwavering devotion to each other and to their people. "It has been a long journey, Nicholas," Cecily said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. Warwick squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the deep, abiding love that had sustained them through the years. "A journey worth taking, Cecily," he replied, "every step of the way." They remembered the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, the battles they had fought, both together and alone. They remembered the fear, the doubt, the pain, but also the joy, the triumph, the unwavering love that had bound them together. They remembered Thomas, his sacrifice, his unwavering loyalty, his memory now a beacon of honor and inspiration. They remembered the loyal servant, his bravery, his ultimate sacrifice, his name now etched in stone and in their hearts. They remembered Elmsworth, his treachery, his downfall, his ultimate fate a reminder of the consequences of ambition and deceit. They remembered the king, his trust, his gratitude, his recognition of their love and their service. They remembered Alara, her loyalty, her friendship, her unwavering support, a constant presence in their lives. They remembered Sir Callan, his courage, his redemption, his enduring friendship, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity. They remembered the whispers of Ravenshire, the secrets hidden within the castle walls, the shadows of the past that had threatened to consume them. But they had faced those shadows, they had unveiled the truth, and they had emerged stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. As the last rays of the sun faded below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Cecily and Warwick turned to each other, their eyes meeting in a gaze of unwavering love. "What do you think lies ahead, Nicholas?" Cecily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Warwick smiled, a gentle, loving smile that reached his eyes. "Whatever it may be, Cecily," he replied, "we will face it together, as we always have, as we always will." He leaned down and kissed her, a tender, loving kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared memories, of enduring love, of a future that stretched before them, filled with hope and promise. Their journey had been long, arduous, filled with challenges and triumphs, with sorrow and joy, with fear and courage. But it had been a journey worth taking, a journey that had led them to each other, to a love that had conquered all, a love that would endure for eternity. Theirs was, indeed, a story for the ages.